Hello and welcome to our ArchiTechTALK series. My name's Dean Smith. I'm a principal consultant in cybersecurity and secure networking here at ArchiTech. And this is a little bit different to our normal Insights technical blog series posts. Today we're going to launch a new capability around Blue Hat cybersecurity vlogging. So it's our first entry into video logging, and we're going to start today on an introduction to hacking tactics and techniques. Now that in itself is probably a bit of a random starting point, but there is a little bit of logic behind it because what we're seeing in today's market is probably a little bit of a disconnect between how our clients are applying all of their cybersecurity frameworks to where the industry is heading in terms of all the security vendors out there and their alignment directly to the Mitre attack framework. So what I want to do today is run through a little bit about how hacking actually works, what those tactics and techniques are, and how they're mapped to the Mitre attack metrics that clients probably need to be a little bit more familiar with if they're not already, because there's a lot of power and capability out of those platforms than you probably tend to get out of your existing NIST frameworks or whatever you're using for your cybersecurity governance at the moment. So, who's this for? I guess it's probably aligned for anybody in IT, whether or not you're directly on the ground and you're maybe a network engineer, security engineer, you might be in DevOps or SecOps, or you might be a web developer, database administrator. Doesn't really matter. It's everybody in those roles has a particular role to play within making sure that your attack surface is minimized. If you're into management, in terms of you might be a CISO, you might even be a board member or just a general IT manager, you obviously have a vested interest in controlling that risk appetite and making sure that your security posture is minimized as best as possible. So I think you'll probably find that you'll get a little bit out of this as well in terms of what that goes to show you from the Mitre attack side of things and how you can implement that into your strategies and get a lot of value out of it. That's the intent of today. We're going to probably start off with a little bit of a hacking demonstration, because what I would like to show you is how easy and scary it is out there to actually develop attack techniques with basically very little effort around what's out there as readily made tools from a very vast and mature community out there of attackers. So it's interesting because you'll find that in terminology sense, you'll hear either a red hat, which is somebody who's trying to attack a network, or a blue hat, being somebody who's trying to defend a network. There is a lot of material out there to teach hacking and to try and improve skills, and it's completely agnostic to whether or not you have good intent or bad intent out there. So just be aware that you'll find some of the stuff I'm going to run through today is pretty scary in terms of what is readily available to people who have that bad intent or that red hat sort of mindset, who are trying to disrupt against your environment. So we're going to just have a bit of a look around and run through some of those hacking techniques, show you how it works in the real world, and then we'll map that back to the Mitre attack stuff and run through some of those scenarios that we can use to try and make sure we're strengthening up your security posture through that strategy development with Mitre. Okay, so here's our test scenario that we've got set up here. We're going to assume that somebody within the corporate network sitting on this head office user VLAN segment has been compromised on their Windows machine. Now, it may have been a phishing campaign or whatever, but let's just assume that somebody's got in there, they have taken control of this machine, and they've actually started undertaking a little bit of a network sniffing or a discovery process, and they've established or found out there is a security camera sitting on the same network segment it's not a good idea in the first place. It should be on its own segment for IoT devices. So let's just take that as read. But we know in the real world that's not necessarily always the case. There are some IoT devices that get inadvertently plugged in onto the same LAN as others. So let's assume that's happened in this particular case. There's a security camera running a Linux version operating system, and the attacker has managed to gain a foothold onto that machine. So we're going to assume the role of this Linux machine here, who is then going to do the same sort of process where they're going to go out and see what else they can discover on the network as well. They are going to find a web server sitting on this DMZ segment over here. And being a web server, out in that DMZ, there's usually a case where it's doing something relatively important, serving up traffic. And they think, you know what, this might be a good opportunity to go and have a bit of a look and see if that's of value to us. So that's our scenario that we're going to use here. We're going to jump onto this particular security camera. Now, those of you who are a bit astute might realize that this is actually a Kali Linux machine as opposed to what you'd expect a command line interface to look like for a security camera. Fair enough, I'm taking a little bit of creative liberty here, but the reason I wanted to do that was to show you essentially, while I've got this Kali Linux up and running, what it actually is for those of you who may not be familiar with it or aware of what it is. Kali Linux is a free Linux distribution, usually positioned as a pen testing platform because it has all of these pre-built tools loaded into it that do a lot of hacking capability. So anything from information gathering through to looking for vulnerabilities, testing against web applications specifically, databases, how to attack passwords, wireless environments, you name it, it does it. It's got all these tools predefined in there, and it makes it a very good tool for anybody who wants to assume that role of a pen tester or just a general red hat attacker. So getting this onto a network can give you a lot of power across that environment. One of the exploitation tools here, Metasploit, is what we're going to be focusing on today in our little attack. But there's lots of other things in here, so it's a very, very powerful tool set, the Kali Linux. There are other distributions out there as well, but this is the one that's generally quite commonly used in the hacking environment, and I thought I'd just give you a bit of an overview of what that is. So again, let's take some creative liberty here and assume that this is in fact a security camera. So what we've done here is we've just got a command prompt, and we're going to go in and have a bit of a look at that machine that we've actually been able to identify as that web server. So we know the IP address of it is here. We're going to run an nmap command, which is a network map command. And it's actually going to go out, and you'll be amazed at the sort of information that just a simple command like this from a tool like run on Kali Linux will actually provide in terms of all the information around that. It's probably going to take about 5 or so minutes to run. So while we're doing that, I'm actually going to go and look at some other tools that's readily available on the web for you that you can look at from a hacking perspective. This one's called Vulnerable Hub, and it actually has a lot of virtual machines out there that are specifically designed to have vulnerabilities in them for people to be able to download and run up and attack essentially as a training platform. So you can see here there's some in here with various difficulty levels, and they'll all be based on different types of attack techniques in there. And there are pages and pages of them, and there's a whole community around there and associated YouTube channels dedicated to running through and how the hacks actually work and how you can go about exploiting those vulnerabilities, etc. So it's a very interesting website in itself to be able to educate and upskill hacking people with those sorts of requirements. Now, Metasploitable is another one. Whereas the vulnerable hub site generally are based on sort of application level sort of attacks in general, Metasploitable too is designed more to do sort of network level attacks. So this goes through and runs all the different capabilities around being able to download a vulnerable image that you can then use for various network sort of level attacks. Lots of different websites out here that run through giving you all the information you need around penetration testing, or essentially red hat hacking. This is a really good one called Hacktricks. And then you've got various other ones that you can get all scripts for downloading, and just basically go onto the sites and download them essentially by a single command that you run on there. And you've got all these different sort of databases for hacking information gathering. So it's very, very valuable in terms of all the resources out here that you can get out of that environment. It's phenomenal when you start looking. It's a real eye-opener as to what you can get. Let's jump back into our Kelly thing. It's just about done at the moment. So this is where it's running this Nmap against our web server. So it looks like we're just about done. Okay, so here's what we've pulled out of this particular nmap command that's run against our web server. We can see all sorts of information on here that is a treasure trove for people that are trying to understand if there's any sort of ways into this machine that they can run. So you can see specific ports that are open that it's mapped. So you can see here it's running FTP. It's running a specific version or application version, and it shows you that information. Same thing for its SSH. It's already telling us that this is a Ubuntu Linux machine, and it shows us the version of OpenSSH running. All sorts of applications that are running on here that's open, and what versions that they are that it's running. So what a hacker will generally do is start going through these methodically and figuring out if there is any particular vulnerabilities against these types of applications and codes out there that's running that they can look to exploit. The interesting thing that drew us to this was the fact that it's running a web server running this Apache HTTP on here. So that in itself is really interesting, and we can look at that from attacking it from the web application perspective. But before we do that, let's just have a bit of a quick look around and see what else. There are a lot of open ports on here, a lot of applications that are running, which usually is probably not going to be the case, but this is in fact a Metasploitable 2 image as well. So that's the reason why there are so many open ports and vulnerabilities, just to give people more opportunity to hack into it. So again, we're taking a little bit of creative liberty in the sense that this isn't a traditional web server. It's quite open to vulnerabilities and hacking. Lots of applications in here. This one's really interesting. I can see here Unreal IRC. For those of you that are relatively old like me, IRC is Internet Relay Chat. It's actually still used today, but it was very prevalent back when I was a network engineer 20 odd years ago. But that's still running on here, and I think that could be interesting. We might have a look at that and see if we can exploit that one as our starting point. Before we get into that though, I'm going to have a quick look at the web server and just see what sort of information we can get about that web service just by running some very basic commands. So if I was to do a whatweb on here, you'll actually find that it comes back with information relating to this, and it even runs through and tells me the version of PHP running on this web server. So PHP is essentially a program or a scripting language for web servers. So this actually tells me all information around that, and PHP in its own right has tends to be vulnerable with certain versions of code as well. So that would be, as a hacker, I would think maybe let's have a bit of a look and see if that 5.2.4 version that's running on there is potentially susceptible to vulnerabilities that I can exploit. Another really cool one from a perspective of having a look at the web server and interrogating all the directories is running GoBuster. Now GoBuster is an interesting one because it actually runs through a word list that I had downloaded from the site that I showed you previously with all of the scripts. What it actually does is it goes through and looks through a list of all the common directory names and will return all of these directories that it can find on that web server that's running, along with the links associated with what's running on there. So I would probably look at trying to see how I can exploit some of these websites or the sub-services or pages that are running on here as well, as a starting point. I can even actually just go and look at the code that's running on there, on that site, on the main page. So that will show me what the actual header or the main site is in the language that I can pull out of that. So we could probably go to town on that. There's a whole thing around about web hacking. So what I might do is I'll just show you very quickly around what it looks like. I actually have another application on here called Damn Vulnerable Web Application. Now this is a website or another VM image that you can download if you specifically want to be practicing your skills at attacking and hacking into websites directly. So you can see on this left-hand side here, this actually runs through a lot of different scenarios, right through from cross-site scripting, SQL injections, and all these sorts of things that you can do that you usually hack against a website. And it gives you great capabilities. You can either set it as easy hacking, so set the security levels to low, through to impossible, meaning impossible is that it's all well properly defined and tied down from a security perspective. So lots of different mechanisms to do. There's a whole community based around how to go through the Damn Vulnerable Web Application and help each other out, and being able to exploit particular vulnerabilities in there. So that's again, web sort of hacking and application layer hacking is in its own right a whole different sort of scenario or kettle of fish to go through. So I'm going to stick with back on our Kali machine here, or our security camera. Now what I'm going to do is actually look at whether or not there is a particular vulnerability. I was quite keen on that, the one here, this Unreal IRCD. So if I was to go and have a bit of a look at that application, I can actually look at it from directly within here through the SearchSploit database. So SearchSploit is a database freely available on the web to look for vulnerabilities particular to that. So it's automatically going to pull up. There are 4 known vulnerabilities or exploits that I can actually do in relation to this, which is really quite interesting. What I would most likely do now is go and have a look at a website called the Exploit Database. And if I was to go and type in here Unreal IRCD, it's going to pull me up a list of vulnerabilities that it actually saw through that SearchSploit database. It's referencing the same database. But if I look at here, this one here is using a framework called Metasploit. If I click onto this guy here, it's going to pull me up with a list of code that can actually be run against that version of that Unreal IRCD to gain a backdoor into this particular application, or into the actual system itself, using that application as the way to exploit it. So up here, you have an ID for reference. So if I get onto that there and I go back to my Kali Linux thing now, I'm going to run this, what we call the MSF console, which is the Metasploit framework. And using Metasploit, I can actually run that script and that code and execute it against a target, which in this case is going to be my web server. And it's going to execute against that vulnerability and get me full access to that device. All right, so here we go. What I'm going to do is I'm going to type in use exploit. And this one is Unix. This is the link that I had before that I showed you from that site. IRC Unreal _IRCD 3281 backdoor. So this module will get loaded in here that's already exists within the Metasploit database. If I do show options, this is going to show all I need to know. It knows that it exploits this on, it goes to port 6667, which is the port that's running on my Unreal IRC platform. Now from in here, I can have a look at all the different ways that Metasploit is going to look at initiating a payload, or getting me what we actually want to do is get a shell access to that machine. So when it's going to run this exploit, it's going to create this backdoor and then give me a shell so that I can start typing in commands in full access to that machine, so the web server. So in here, I'm just going to do set a payload 1. It's going to set me up with a Unix command shell. And then what I'm going to do is set hosts, which is actually the address of the web server I'm trying to hack or connect to. And it's going to set that up there. And then all I nearly need to do now is go exploit. So what this is going to do now is connect to that, and it's going to run that script, get me a session, which it's done here. So here you can see I'm connected to that machine. And what I actually have now, if I do ID, you can see I've got root access to that machine now. So that was very simple in terms of getting access and hacking into a machine that gave me full unfettered rights to that machine now. So if I do, just run some basic Linux commands, I can see what's in here in terms of what I've got access to. What will most likely happen in most scenarios here is that you would have a command prompt for a proper reverse shell. I haven't gone to that extent here. Most hackers would then go ahead and create a proper environment in here that they can get access to. For this point, I'm just not going to do it. I'm just going to keep running through keep this relatively simple. Okay, so effectively, I have full control of this machine now. I could do anything I wanted to do on here. I've got full root access. I could look at running, encrypting all the files from a ransomware perspective. I could take away any particular files that I wanted to do from a data exfiltration perspective. If there are, maybe patient records, if I'm a health organisation, or anything in there that would be valuable to me on the market. I'm outside of here. The world's my oyster, basically. I can do whatever I like. So, a couple of key takeaway points for this, I guess, is that first and foremost, hacking tools are everywhere and freely available to everybody. So I think it's important, if your role is to be a blue hat or a blue team defender of your environment, that you at least understand some of the principles and concepts around what a hacker actually does and how they operate, because you can't defend against something you don't understand. We're going to touch on that in the next section, where we're going to look through the actual Mitre attack tactics and techniques in a second. But I guess probably the other key points to take away from this is that there's really two ways that attackers will look at, impacting or exploiting your environment. They'll do it either at the network layer, which is what we did. We looked at the real IRC there and attacked that essentially based on an open port at the network layer. So there's either that mechanism, or there's through the actual application itself, where you can run attacking against a web server application itself. So a couple of different mechanisms around that, and you need to be able to defend or understand against both of them. Just looking at some of these network things that we did there's a couple of key concepts to take away from this, in the sense that this environment obviously wasn't very well set up in terms of a security perspective. We didn't have any sort of real micro-segmentation stopping the security camera being on a separate network segment to that of the workstation that was exploited in the first place. And we'll probably had some pretty lax firewall rules in there as well too, right? To be able to connect through to the web server on that port 9777 using our Metasploit framework. In a lot of instances, there will be cases where you can actually get through to a particular port through a firewall because that's what it's supposed to do. So as an example there, in port 80 being for the web server, that may well have a rule in the firewall that says users in that segment can talk on port 80 through to the firewall because it's supposed to do it that way. And in instances like that, that's where it becomes really important that you understand the concept of intrusion prevention, because where traffic will be allowed through a firewall in certain instances, you need to be able to do some proper deep packet inspection in terms of what's actually happening, what commands are being run, what sort of packets are going through to that indicate that this could be potentially risky traffic. And that's what intrusion prevention is all about. It'll run against specific scenarios that it knows is nefarious through what they call signature files, and it will look for understanding whether or not there are potentially exploits or nefarious activities going on through that thing, and block it if you're using intrusion prevention mechanisms. So it's very important that you look at and understand where intrusion prevention is important for you. Look at your particular critical or vulnerable sources of information, or your crown jewels that you need to be protecting, and make sure that you've got some intrusion prevention sitting in front of that to stop it being attacked. So that's the second sort of takeaway. The last thing is that probably what was important here is that understanding hackers will generally look at the vulnerabilities. They will methodically go through all of those different ports that we saw there, try and find out which ones are vulnerable to exploitation, and then do that one by one, try and crack into it. It can take a fair amount of time, but if they think it's worth it and there's a payload at the end for them, then they'll keep persisting, right? So understanding how that works, what ports should be closed, what applications shouldn't be running, what should be patched, because there's known vulnerabilities, is really important. There are tools out there that will really help in this instance. As an example, there's probably really only about somewhere roughly 5% of vulnerabilities are actually exploitable in the wild. So knowing what to look at and try and patch is complicated in its own right. If you sat there and patched every single bit of software out there in your environment, that's probably all you'd end up doing. So having tools like Cisco's vulnerability management platform can actually take all of your database, all of your assets out there, run them through algorithms that use machine learning and AI to understand what's actually really at threat out there around what's exploitable and what isn't, and it will give you essentially prioritization of what you should be patching and what you shouldn't, based on, or what you shouldn't worry about, based on the threats that those applications and those offer to the real world. So if you would like to understand that a little bit further, let me know, and I'll check out and get you in touch with a vulnerability management platform as well. So what we're going to do now is go on to the next phase, where we're going to look at particularly the tactics and techniques that have been applied here just in the hack that we've done, and reference that against the Mitre attack metrics, which is in its own right really powerful, and I think you'll get a little bit out of this next section. Okay, Mitre attack. Mitre attack is essentially a framework that's been built out as a database to show all of the different tactics and techniques that are used by threat actors out there across the whole attack kill chain. It's broken down into 14 different types of tactics, from reconnaissance activities that people go through to gather information, through to obtaining initial access, escalating their privilege levels, moving across the network, taking command and control, exfiltrating data, and the impact associated with that, whether or not that be encrypting traffic from a ransomware perspective, or wiping data, or whatever. So all of these different tactics basically run through what those techniques are about, that's used within those tactics. Now, a really interesting tool, and actually, sorry, I'll take a step back and say what ATT&ACK stands for. It stands for Adversary, Tactics, Techniques, and Common Knowledge. It's really powerful, and I think there's a tool here that you might get a lot of value out of called the ATT&ACK Navigator. Completely free and available for people, and it's very, very powerful in the way that it's been structured as a tool itself. So what you can do is go into the Mitre ATT&ACK Navigator, create a particular file. Now we're going to be basing on the enterprise attacks database. It'll bring you up with this particular, all of the 14 different tactics and then all of the associated techniques associated with those tactics. And it gives you the power to do a number of things. And I think there's probably 3 specific use cases or workflows that I think clients of ours could take into effect and get some use of in the way that they go about their planning for mitigating against these types of attacks. So first and foremost, just to run you through this quickly, we've got a layer that we've opened up. Now, what I can do is go into the layer controls. Let's just have a bit of a quick look, and we'll say this is a layer that we're going to associate with our Windows administrators. And what we're going to do is we're going to rate from 1 to 10 our maturity across these areas. This is just a specific use case that we might want to use for getting our Windows administrators to see how they can monitor and assess and build out a strategy around their platforms. So in here we'll say that these guys might look after the Windows servers, they might look after the Office suite, and you can see as I'm deselecting all of these, it's actually taking out a lot of those tactics or the techniques that's used specifically within those environments for Windows and Office suite exploitations. So once I've got those together and taken those out, I can essentially go through, if I'm the Windows administrator, and look at those that are applicable in here and prioritize where I think we need to be looking at our tactics for making sure that we're not seeing any specific threat opportunities based on these particular environments. So if I was to look at and focus on phishing as an example, I can click on it and go and actually have a look at that technique, and it will bring me up all the information around phishing. It'll show me some actual specific compromises that have been done via different threat groups, and it'll run through around all the mitigation factors that I can start building into my planning and strategy as a Windows administrator for making sure that I'm catering to all those requirements. So I might go in here and go phishing and under that tactic control. Or first and foremost, what I'll do is I'll build out a little bit of a numbering scheme. So I'm going to scale these on a 1 to 10. And what I'll do is I'll go into this technique for phishing, and I might say, you know what, from a maturity point of view with the phishing control, sorry if I was to select it, I can then go, I think we're probably sitting at around about a 7, right? And it'll start automatically color coding things and building out what we've got around all those different capabilities from the Windows server perspective. Account manipulation, I can click on it, drill down and run through all those sorts of things again. But, let's say we score this as a 3 or a 4. And I'll color code things and start going through all of those different, as I build out that for the Windows administrators. I might do the same thing again, create a new layer and do the same thing for our network administrators. So if I was to go in my layer controls, call this one network administrators. And then I'll have my color codes 1 to 10 again. And I'll build out all those particular requirements based around just our network specific threat or tactics or techniques. And again, you can start drilling down and understanding what that looks like, build out your same sort of thing, where all these particular exploits are specific to network or network sort of attacks, and then start building them out that way as well. So again, we can rate them, do whatever, and you can export them, build them out, whatever you need to do to start building out a strategy for around that. The other thing that I think is probably a good use case for this as well is you can do another one for, let's create another layer. I think there's a good opportunity here for clients to start looking at not only all of these particular tactics and techniques and how to mitigate against them, but also the tools that are responsible for doing that. So I can create another layer here and go filter through all of the different capabilities around the mitigation circumstances or mitigation tactics. So what mitigates against these particular techniques? And if I was to build out one, as I start going through this and start selecting them, you can see what that does around how it addresses those particular techniques, which is really pretty impressive. So a network filter, maybe a network analyzer like secure network analytics from Cisco that actually does the network detection and response activities. You can say, if I was to implement that, that's the sort of stuff that I'll be mitigating against from the attack perspective. So you can start building out things like that. Now, I actually did one a little bit earlier. So the other thing that you can do is export them and import them. They're just JSON files, or you can even do them to Excel spreadsheets. So I can open an existing layer. I've created one as an example for a firewall, a Cisco firewall, and then it'll start building out all of those capabilities that I've got from the mitigation points that I identified in there as network specific to the firewall. So these are mitigation points that will be covered off by that firewall. So building that out and putting that into your business cases around this is, our investment in this or intrusion prevention or whatever will cover off these particular techniques is really quite valuable, I think, in being able to help you in understanding and justifying where to get your best bang for buck in your spend from, making sure you're covering across the whole attack surface. So the last one that I think probably would be of good use and value to you as well is in understanding where there are specific attack capabilities, or I'm going to run through and show you up here. There's a lot of the threat intelligence out here, things around groups and campaigns that have been run specific to all of the different major attack groups out there. If you've got ones that are relevant to your specific industry, there are groups that specifically target, finance markets or healthcare markets and those sorts of things. Understanding what they are and building out capability in the attack navigator, where you can actually build them out based on those threat groups. So you can build out again. Just based on these threat groups, what areas that they actually use in those particular groups as part of their tactics and techniques, and build something out that a group that attacks your industry can be targeting you against, and looking at that from that perspective as well. So there's some really good capabilities around threat groups and also campaigns that have been run. So here's, you can see exactly how they went about the Ukraine electric power attack back in 2015 and the mechanisms that they used to attack it. So building out those capabilities is really cool. Having a good play around with this, you'll find it very, very powerful. And some of the things that you can use in your day-to-day defense mechanisms and your strategy planning, I think you'll find very useful. So that was just a really quick overview of the Mitre attack. And if there's anything else that you want to see in relation to that or any assistance with it, please reach out to me. More than happy to talk you through it. It's completely free, really valuable, and I think you'll find that this is a really good extension to things like your NIST frameworks that you might be using from your detect, protect, recover, respond, particularly in relation to your protect part. it really drills down to that next layer around what you can do to understand what those actual threats are and the tactics and techniques that are being used out there in the real world, and start planning against those specifically. So just a quick summary on some takeaways in relation to Mitre attack. It's becoming very, very prevalent across the security vendors at the moment. They're using it and referencing it in their tools, which I'm going to touch on in the next sort of just final session. But I think what you'll find is that it will help you a lot in terms of building on or as an adjunct to your existing cybersecurity risk and governance frameworks at the moment that you're currently using. You'll find that I think there's really good capabilities for you to start building out strategies based on the real granular capabilities that it offers you for individual teams. So you might want to look at leveraging this for your database administrators, for your network administrators, your sysadmin guys, building them out their own individual layers around what that needs to be looked at from their individual perspective. That whole attack surface covers everybody. Not everybody is going to be able to do everything from their own specific perspective, but giving them a view within that Mitre attack framework of what is appropriate for them to focus on and build out their strategies and their mitigation factors, I think is a really compelling argument for you. The second one, I think, is probably being able to use that to build out some of your business cases and your strategy for investment and budgeting around your tools that you need to use. I ran through that. I think it's a really good use case for being able to throw that into a proposal if you're a tech guy, or if you're looking for funding from the CIO or CISO or whatever. I think that adds some compelling arguments when you can start showing all the mitigation factors that what you're trying to do ultimately accomplishes or reduces your threat surface. And lastly, if you've got threat actors out there that are specifically targeting you, you can actually look at that as well and start building out a little bit of an understanding around where the threat points actually exist from those perspectives, and start building out your strategies for mitigating that too. So really, really powerful tool. I really encourage everybody to jump onto it. Okay, let's jump onto the next section. Okay, we're just going to finish it off now with a very quick intro to the Cisco Firewall Management Center in relation to all this stuff that we captured from our attacks or our hacking earlier on. So what we did, if you can recall, we actually went from a network segment which we called the head office users, where we were attacking from there, from the security camera, over through the firewall to our DMZ web server. So I was going through this particular firewall, which has been capturing all of that traffic. So we can go through and have a bit of a look at an analysis around that and see exactly what it found as a part of that. So if we were to go and set this for the last few hours as an example, we'll just do the last 6 hours. It will show us what that is. If I was to go through and look at the events that happen in here, we can see 63 different intrusion events captured over that time frame. So we can just drill down into these and have a bit of a look around what this would do. Now, here's where it gets interesting, right? So what we did is we had a particular policy on that firewall in detection mode, so intrusion detection rather than intrusion prevention. So what that means is it allowed those particular hacks to get through. But if we had it in intrusion prevention mode, a lot of those hacks would have been unsuccessful and it would have been blocked, as it says there, would block. So it's very important to understand that you need to have an intrusion prevention policy sitting there behind or in front of essentially your particular machines that are vulnerable to attack or high targets for attack. So this shows you all the different information in relation to all of these attacks that have been happening. But this is the interesting part here that I wanted to call out. So the Mitre attack references. So it actually goes through and drills down into those 14 different tactics in there and shows what that particular packet was doing or that particular piece that was captured as an event in here. So we'll run through and show you this is a particular command and control application layer attack that was done. It shows that it's a compromise, and it's really good information, whereas traditionally all you've seen here is what actually does this mean. We've got an event in here, but trying to tie it back to anything of relevance to what was actually happening or how it fits into the whole attack surface, understanding around where it's sitting of what it was trying to accomplish has been traditionally difficult to do. So having this capability natively into the firewall is really an important addition to your tool set for understanding how to mitigate against these as a future requirement. The other thing that I was going to show you was just briefly around Cisco's XDR platform, or their extended detect and response. So this takes it a little bit of a step further than what the Firewall Management Center even does, and it actually has dashboards in here specific to all of those different Mitre attack techniques. So you can see in here it shows the amount of actual initial access events that have been captured from all the different sources that are leading into this extended detect and response platform. And you can start drilling down into these. The bit that I really like is under the coverage map here, you can actually see all of the different platforms that have been integrated and what's taking telemetry from in the XDR platform. And it actually shows you what that contributes to understanding around all of those different techniques that's covered in here. So if I was to take off the secure network analytics or take that out of the equation, for example, you can see that it drops some of those particular capabilities around what it's actually capable of reporting against in those techniques. So it's really good to understand all the different platforms and the different types of telemetry that you can start adding into this, what impact it has on your visibility around the whole Mitre attack, TTPs, or tactics, techniques and processes. So really powerful tool. I'll run another session later on in relation to the XDR platform itself, because it's a fantastic tool. But for now, I just wanted to cover off and make sure that you're sort of familiar with the fact that all of the Mitre attack tactics and techniques are really starting to become prevalent within the all of the security platforms and offerings out there, and it really does add another element to your visibility into understanding how attackers are actually trying to get into your environments and how to protect against them with the mitigating factors. So hopefully you found that informative, and I'm always available to reach out to if you want any more information, you want me to run through any of these particular products that I've sort of touched on today. Please feel free to reach out to us at sales@architech.net.au. Thanks for your time.